Right, so we've got, as we've heard from Bob Watson, malnutrition, obesity, a pandemic of NCDs. We've got a fantastic, free, sustainable diet called breastfeeding, and only 30% or just over are actually exclusively breastfeeding in the world, against a $70 billion industry, some of which are at this forum. So that raises an important issue. And then we've got the problem that most of our food now is industrialized, it's processed, it's sugary, it's junk, it's all over the place. And what are we going to do about it, and how are we going to address the inequality issues that go with that and the reasons that people are eating these diets? So these are big questions. I'm going to start with water. Water is one of the most cited nutrition scientists in the world. I'm going to ask you what is a healthy diet in a nutshell. Actually, that's quite good, in a nutshell.
That's a very good start.
That's a very good healthy diet. But more important, why has your profession of nutrition so screwed up over fat and sugar?
Yeah.
I've been eating low-fat milk and yogurts for the last 30 years, putting on weight. I'm a sugar addict, and now I'm told it's all sugar.
Yeah, not a simple answer to that, but there has been a strong belief. Maybe it's almost so simple that, like, connecting fat in the diet, it just goes under your skin and into your belly. That makes you fat. But in fact, there was really no evidence, no good evidence all the way along that getting rid of fat would make you skinny. There was also...
Were you saying this all along?
I was skeptical, but I've been fighting this for 25 years. And realizing, in fact, when you scratch away to look at what's underneath a lot of public statements, it is a bit like religion. If you say it enough and enough, people start to believe it. And I think it's important to go beyond just what's being said and look at the basis of what is being said. And when you I look for the evidence, there really was no good evidence that low-fat diets would either make you skinny or that would prevent cancer or prevent cardiovascular disease or diabetes. And it was being sold. That diet was being sold for doing all of that. It took a lot of data to, there was virtually no data, but it really fell upon us to do the studies, compile the data, and show that, in fact, there wasn't this great benefit of low-fat diets.
So what is the healthy diet?
Well, yeah, it's not too complicated. A healthy diet means healthy sources of carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are neither good nor bad, but if you over-refine them, like you were saying, you remove most of the nutrition, make them converted to glucose too quickly. Whole grains are healthy, on the other hand. Fats are neither inherently good nor bad. There are what we did to really healthy liquid vegetable oils was probably the biggest mistake of the last 100 years. We partially hydrogenated them and created trans fat. And it took us almost 100 years to find out that was a disaster. But now in the US, we've removed almost all of trans fat. Denmark was ahead of us. Other countries are doing that too. And basically, plant oils are good for us. They lower blood cholesterol, reduce heart disease. Animal fats are not so good for us. And then if we look at proteins, essentially plant proteins as a package have lots of health benefits. Too many animal protein sources, red meat in particular, do not promote health, so shifting more toward a plant-based diet is beneficial. Throw on some fruits and vegetables, and you've got a pretty healthy diet.
But why is the sugar industry so dominant in the US? I was at the World Health Assembly last week, or was it the week before? And we put forward the Child Obesity Action Plan and the NCD, Non-Communicable Disease Action Plan, and one country stopped its endorsement. Every country stood up and said, we support this, bar one. I think you might know
could I guess
which country that is.
Right.
And it's because of pressure from the food industry, just as they killed the breast milk substitute endorsement last year. And that was more than that. It was European industries as well. So industry is not abiding by the rules.
No, industry's not monolithic by any means. There are some very bad players. And what part of our job, and one of the ways we got trans fat out, was to find some partners in the industry and get them to...
So it's finding the good guys.
It's finding the good guys, yes.
Sunita, India. I lived in Nepal for 2 years. I ate dal bhat purely. I lost 3 stone. It's the healthiest diet in the world. It's fantastic. How is India screwing up its food system?
Oh, very much like the rest of the world. I mean, we have a double, in fact, I would argue a triple burden because, Tony, on one hand, we have malnutrition, we have hunger, which is clearly something which is a blight on the whole world. On the other hand, we're eating bad, and we're getting obesity, we're getting hypertension, and in a country where we have poor people, and therefore these are diseases of the rich.
Yeah.
But I think there is a triple burden that we have, which is something that has not been discussed in this room at all. The burden of a large number of farmers, smallholder farmers, whose livelihoods are about growing food. They're in the business of food, but they're not businesses. And I think that's the important thing that we have to remember. And we also have to remember that those people don't need fancy models to tell them that climate change is going to happen and that impacts are going to happen. They're seeing it now, today. Weather is getting more variable, more extreme. We're getting more freak events. They're getting crop losses. So we need to be able to indict. And I think that's where I would argue that if you join all these dots, the dot of malnutrition, the dot of overeating, and the dot of climate change and its impact on smallholder farmers, then you have to indict the modern, industrialized, chemicalized agribusiness which is responsible for food. And which means, Tony, calling it out more often. Calling it out so that industry is forced to de-glamorize that food, so that governments are forced to regulate for nutrition, for nature. Today, governments at best nature, just to end this point, they regulate only for safety. And when they regulate for safety, they actually make it a barrier for even smallholder farmers to participate. So I think we're getting food completely wrong, but you have to de-glamorize it.
So you support your Hindu nationalist prime minister when he says don't eat meat and go completely vegetarian and don't slaughter cows?
You know, that's a very fascinating debate in India, as you know, right now.
That's why I raised it. They're all hungry. I'm trying to keep them away.
And it's fascinating because, you know, as an environmentalist, and all of you here would say meat is bad. But I wrote an article in India saying, as an environmentalist, I would advocate eating meat. Why? Because it is about the livelihoods of very poor farmers. It's not about meat. It's about how much you eat and how you grow it. And I think that's what we need to be discussing. But I just want to make the point that, and that's not often called out. And I think just to make a final point here, Tony, is that I'm very passionate about this thing about de-glamorizing. We have to make what is bad sin. And the good news of my Hindu nationalist government is that what they have also done is that from the 1st of July, all sugar-sweetened beverages are classified as sin. And they have a tax. Sin. They're in the same category as tobacco. And they get a 40% tax. So I think that's what we need to be able to push for.
Okay, fantastic. Juan, let's move to Mexico. One of the fattest countries in the world now. Epidemic of obesity. 58% of Mexicans eat food with a barcode on it.
Yes.
How can you fix this?
Well, very complex. We used to have a very, very good diet, the Mesoamerican diet. We are eating less beans. We are eating less fruits and vegetables. We are eating a lot of processed food, as you mentioned. 25% of our calories come from ultra-processed foods. And Mexico is one of the champions in sugar-sweet beverage intake. 65% of Mexicans consume more sugar than the upper limit set by WHO. So sugar is a very, very big problem in Mexico. We are consuming sugar all over. And 70% of all the added sugar that we consume is apported by sugar-sweetened beverages. So sugar-sweetened beverages have been the target of policies in Mexico, and we have been able, as you know, to pass a tax After 2 years, we have demonstrated that a 10% tax has reduced the purchases of sugar-sweetened beverages by 7.5%, and people are purchasing more water. So they are purchasing a healthy substitute.
It's not that much, 7.5%. It's a nudge.
It's not that much because the tax is very little.
Yeah.
India is applying a 40% tax, and that's very good, Sunita. The original proposal in Mexico was 20%. The tax was only 10%. And there is also an 8% tax on what we call junk food, ultra-processed food. And the results on ultra-processed food is a reduction of 5.5% in purchases. So taxes work. Taxes do work. And they also provide revenue that can be used for the prevention of obesity and to support sustainable food systems.
So how did the sugar companies respond to this? Because in America, they're obviously, that's why they blocked the
There
WHO.
was a very strong opposition, and there is still a very strong opposition. Every year when we discuss the income law, they are threatening to beat the tax, to remove the tax. So every year we have to fight just to keep the tax or even to increase it to 20%. But unfortunately, sugar-sweetened beverage industry is completely opposed to these measures.
So they're not like, I mean, Matthew was suggesting that you can change them. You can move them towards lower sugar drinks, better quality, and sell them and market them in attractive ways. But you're not finding that in Mexico.
Well, there are some companies that have been reducing the amount of sugar in their beverages to about half. And I think that there are very few companies, but the big ones, they are not really willing to modify their formulas.
It's a bit like the fossil fuel industry in that you can try and sell them to be energy industry, move into wind, solar, renewables and the like, and not, but they still kind of, they're addicted to oil.
They are the same ones that produce water, so they are winning because people are purchasing more water, but the truth is that they are not willing to have their products demonized. And I think that sugar-sweetened beverages are not good for health, and we should reduce their intake.
Sonja, you're an expert on the food system impact on the planet. Just remind us of some of the gory details.
Well, we've heard a few of them today. And more or less, we're like Puckman. We're eating up our planet. But the outcomes are unequal. And actually, what I'd like to point out is that many of the solutions aren't global either. They're more local. So just 3 examples. So first of all, every year we're pulling out 150 million tons of nitrogen from our atmosphere and putting it as fertilizer on our fields. Now, that's a fantastic technology, which is the reason why most of us are here alive in this room. But what we're doing with it is not keeping it on the farm, we're dumping it in the waterways and coastal areas around our cities. So food will fix it, but will food fix it by shifting to organics or by cycling that nitrogen back to the farms that need it most? Secondly, looking at water, actually water's great. If you look behind, we're actually well within our planetary boundary for freshwater use. But that's not the same anywhere. I mean, to go back to India and Pakistan and the big basins of the Indus and the Ganges, they're seriously water stressed. So again, does food fix it by telling all of those small farmers to stop growing rice, stop growing wheat? Or do we actually build in a huge water trade through food trade around the planet? We've got all of these options open to us. Third and final example, we've heard a lot about meat today, but what about vegetable oils as well? The expansion has gone up tremendously. It's been explosive. And we're going to see it, for example, continuing to go up in Africa for domestic oil use. And that's one of the final frontiers of biodiversity, those forests. So again, does food fix it by changing the way that we're producing these vegetable oils, or by asking a whole new generation of Africans to consume differently, less abundantly and less easily than the rest of us around the world?
But small seems to be beautiful in the sense that small farms are more productive, I believe, according to Amartya Sen.
They can be.
And that they're more biodiverse generally.
Yeah.
But there's a huge pressure on shareholders to have massive industrial monocultural farms that destroy the environment.
I'm not sure that's entirely true. So there's been a great piece of research done this year, which has finally demonstrated quite clearly that Most of our food does still come from small farms rather than big farms. There's a lot of difference around the world. That's particularly in Africa, Europe, and Asia. And also, they're not going anywhere. We're seeing about 500 million small farmers today, and this is expected to go up to about 750 million by 2030. So they're not going anywhere. I mean, most of our food does come from that community. There are a lot of ways that we can promote them. Many of those are market-driven by businesses, involving them in value chain certification schemes. We know that. But even more fundamental is what governments are doing. So where you see small farmers as big players in their food systems are in countries which have very equitable land tenure. So examples are China, India, Italy. And where it's very uneven and they're getting very small markets are in the countries with very inequitable land tenure, such as South Africa, where I come from, or Brazil.
I remember hearing Bill Clinton here just 3 years ago talking about all the work they were doing to try and improve the business mentality of small farmers, particularly in Africa. And it seems that there is money to be made there, and also productivity, and whilst preserving the environment. So are you reasonably optimistic?
Oh, certainly in Africa. In Africa, it's extremely optimistic. The food problems in Africa are not about failing productivity amongst small farmers. It's just that they're not keeping up with the pace of population growth there.
So, Tari, you want evidence-informed policy. What is the role of evidence in all of this? And do policymakers listen to evidence, or do they basically choose a policy they want and then select any evidence that happens to support it?
So, well, I think they want the evidence that tells them they can have it all. And I think one of the things that, well, the key theme of this particular event is healthy food from sustainable food systems. And there is an implicit assumption that we can have those two things. But we can't necessarily, or rather we don't know we can, and we may not be able to have it always, everywhere, for everyone, in which case there will be decisions that need to be made and people who will need to make those decisions. And I think what often happens is that the evidence of the difficulties gets ditched, or people who are asking the awkward questions don't get included in the discussion. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion about business, and often in this conversation so far, it's all been about how business needs to be involved on the table and so on, et cetera, et cetera. Sonita has provided a very essential counter to that perspective. But I would also point out civil society. I mean, this idea that we need an integrated approach to food is, you know, civil society have been saying this for decades, and they need to be included. And so when we think about evidence, we have some facts, but we have to make something out of those facts. And whose story is it that counts? And at the moment, there's this idea that you can make profits out of all these lovely, green, sustainable, healthy, friendly, delicious things. I don't know. We may need, in many parts of the world, to consume less. We may need less delicious food. We may not be able to afford it. And how are we going to have those very difficult conversations, and whose voice is going to count? So I think scientific evidence is only one tiny part of the whole picture. We need to look at who is shaping the narrative.
But, now you're raising something. George Monbiot said no one ever rioted for austerity.
No.
And, I mean, you know, I think austerity and the economics of austerity and the crazy monetary union without political union in Europe, just to stir it up a bit, and was underpinned Brexit and Trump and migration, because the youth of the world are fed up. They're fed up with us elites, all of us old baby boomers here, who've exploited the planet, seen all our houses grow, and all the young generation are feeling hacked off, and we've just seen that in the British election.
Yeah, I mean, people don't like other people getting more when they get less. I think there's a slightly different way of looking at it.
No, but they don't want austerity, do they? They're protesting and saying, hang on, it's an inequitable share here. I mean, I didn't pay tuition fees when I went to university, but all our kids do now, and they're all drowning in debt, and now they're not getting jobs.
Yeah, it's going to play out differently in different parts of the world. Certainly when we're talking about Africa, parts of India, it's actually we're talking about more. We're also talking about different. And what you're really telling me is you can't tell people that all they can afford is gruel. And I completely right. take that point. But at the same time, we need a collective vision of social justice.
No, that's important.
And about tomorrow's generations. Yeah. And what we don't want is some people eating lobsters while other people, and saying, oh, but it's certified MSC approved, and therefore it's okay, and we can afford to pay $1 million for it.
So we don't want 1 in 5 children in New York going to food banks?
No, we absolutely don't.
Kitchens,
we want a collective vision that is based on social justice and equality, and that might mean having a different understanding of what good enough food is for everyone within planetary boundaries. But in order to have that collective vision, you need to ask difficult questions, and you need to include other people in the conversation, not just big business, and not just the important people, and not just the people who have the power.
Interesting, because that raises all kinds of questions about whether you can do social experiments to explore with some of these collective models to see whether all the vested interests can benefit from it and we end up with a sustainable future. And I think that's the direction we ought to go. Jess, you're on the Lancet commission that Joanne and all the others that Eaters helped to set up, which sounds fantastic. What view are you taking about the healthy food system, and does social inequalities come into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now we sit on the commission really trying to unpack and understand the planetary boundaries, planetary health, and then human health and diets. We are missing in our commission at the moment this social equity, and what does that mean? What does social justice mean? They're different. Equity and justice are different issues. And we know that, you know, the world is a bit on its knees right now, and the food system is not working for a lot of people. So there's a lot of inequities in urban environments, food deserts, food swamps. People don't get access to nutritious food. They can't afford it in many parts of the world. This often runs along poverty lines, racial lines of how cities are constructed. Yeah. In rural places, low and middle income countries, we're seeing a lot of smallholder farmers, pastoralists reeling from climate change due to our decisions as consumers and producers in high-income countries. And their voice matters. And, you know, the world is going to be populated with Nigerians, Pakistanis, Indonesians, Indians, Chinese. That's the future of the world, and their voice matters. But that voice is often not heard. So in addition to having a lot of social inequities in our food system, it's underpinned with these larger power struggles of who's shaping the food system, who has control of the food system, whose voice is not being heard. Everyone in this room cares about the food system, but there's a lot of people out there who don't care at all about the food. You know, they're just eating it to get by, and they don't really, it's not a priority. So how do we make it a priority for the world? And I think that's a big question.
How much does culture come into all of this? I mean,
It's huge, right? When we walk into a market, we bring all of our own personal values, our culture, our religion, peer pressure, how we're raised.
See, my wife gave me a book.
And then you have this food environment that is other values are coming in, and other controls are put on us in how we end up making decisions. And most of the time, health and environment, what we're focusing on the commission, is very low on the agenda for how consumers make choices. It's all about taste, convenience, price. You lived in Nepal. Yeah. The most consumed food in Nepal are instant noodles.
Now it is,
They taste great because they've got all that salty package of whatever that is.
Well, they don't taste great, actually. I mean, dal bite's much better, but they're seen as an aspiration, a status symbol.
It costs a penny.
They are pretty cheap.
You can even eat it raw, which you see a lot.
But I was going to say, I was given a book for Christmas by my wife called French Women Don't Get Fat. And, you know, having lived in Geneva now...
Italian-American women get fat.
Well, you go to Geneva, you go for lunch, and everyone sits down, and everyone has a meal. And we had I had an American staff member join us recently, and she said, I'm just off to get my sandwich. And I said, I'm sorry, this is banned. You have to come down and sit and you do this. And actually the culture of sitting to eat and have a meal seems to be important.
Yeah, we watch cooking more than we do it.
Yeah. Sunita.
Tony, I think that's really where we need to talk more about, because, as you said, it's aspiration and what we look towards, what is modern, what is convenient, what is sexy. And that's what everybody is driving. That's how the food industry is driving it. So if you make home-cooked food sexy once again, and you start, and it's very interesting, especially as we're 4 women here, we need to say this because the food industry has really played into feminism. It's really played us, because it's argued with us that, don't cook food because, there's going to be a Betty Crocker out there with her hair all, nothing out of shape, and she's going to whip up a cake. We're going to process, it's all processed food. And we need to be able to, and we've really played into the hands of the food industry. We should have said, no, let the men cook as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really where... That's really where we need to get back. We need to get back the narrative to talk about home-cooked meals, diverse meals. In my country, people cook at home. They eat at home. They still eat biodiversity on their plate. They don't need to have biodiversity boxed up in some Arctic, place. But that's disappearing because we don't glamorize it enough.
But is it a transition? Because, in London, farmers' markets are coming back. There are many more house husbands who do cook because of the shifting balance of who is the breadwinner and the like. So we can make more traditional, sustainable approaches. And I think this is Gunhild's point, much more sexy, if you like, much more marketable.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think Mexico, India, we're all the same. We don't need to first go bad without... we're eating good. We have good cultures.
But just on your point, I want to get in 2 things because they're in my area, which is women's voice and community engagement, which is incredibly important, and recognizing that all of this starts in childhood.
Oh, absolutely.
Obesity starts before 2.
Absolutely.
If you breastfeed, you dramatically reduce your obesity risk and your type 2 diabetes risk. The way we behave with our children is fundamental to the future. Does anyone have a thought or comment about that?
I only have one comment.
Sorry, Sunita,
Juan, you first.
Please, Sunita.
Okay, just one comment to say that, in fact, surveys done in India showing that women, middle-class women, eat more junk food than their children. Yeah. So I think that's really where we need to attack.
No, I think that the first 1,000 days of life are really important in terms of defining the preferences in food intake. For example, in Mexico, we have now very low rates of exclusive breastfeeding. We have the introduction of sugar-sweetened beverages very early in life. 60% of children under 2 years of age in Mexico consume daily sugar-sweetened beverages. So when they, get to school and they are thirsty, they don't drink water. They drink sugar-sweetened beverages. Yeah. And so it's very important to focus on those first 1,000 days.
Walter, just on the power of mobilization. I mean, I was involved for nearly 20 years on mobilizing women's groups to reduce maternal and newborn mortality, and it works very well. But we've moved into nutrition and found that you can have a big impact on dietary diversity, even in very poor communities. And now, actually, there's a big trial going on in Bangladesh, and I'm affiliated with it, around diabetes. 30% of people over the age of 30 in Bangladesh have pre-diabetes or diabetes. And they're forming men's groups and women's groups with huge appeal to talk about exercise clubs and changing their diet and doing stuff. People are interested if they're mobilized and engaged, and we're not doing enough of that to create the social ecology that enables us to have sustainable change. Walter.
Well, actually, it relates to what you just said, too, that the early years of life are incredibly important, as Juan just said. But we've actually have forgotten about adults. And when we look at the life course, actually the biggest part of obesity gain is after age 20. And of course now we have the problem that we've got obesity in children and in adults. And we do need to pay more attention, in addition to children, to adults. It's sort of easy as adults to say, well, it's kids' problem. Pass it off into somebody else's problem. But that pound, or I guess here a kilogram or half a kilogram gain per year of weight is actually the biggest. What ends up by age 50 is the biggest problem.
What age group is that when you get your kilogram?
Well, it's what we see. It's just a steady per year gain on average in U.S. and in England, most now affluent countries. So there's no big sharp decade. It's that one, about a half a kilogram or kilogram per gain per year on average. And of course, over 30 years, that's a huge problem. It adds hugely to diabetes risk. So we need to do, and what we do see around the world, what you're describing, type 2 diabetes is exploding, but we calculate about 92% preventable. So the kinds of things that you're doing are incredibly important.
So at the World Health Assembly, WHO released a global nutrition strategy, which you can download, and I think there are some copies here. But just as important, an adolescent, a strategy with a good acronym, because I invented it, called AHA, which is Action to Accelerate the Health of Adolescents. And I think adolescence is a huge window of opportunity to come in about stress, about nutrition, about physical activity, about drugs. And we can measure that. And we've been saying this for years, and nobody invests in adolescent health. I'm saying this because I think there are a few funding people here. If you want to invest in adolescent health and collect some evidence to show what can about behavior change there, and I think that's got commercial opportunities as well, we need to be doing many more of those studies, I think. And if anyone's interested, I'm very happy to share my email or visit me on my Twitter account at Global Health Twit. That's the advert over. Right. Any final comments? We've got 5 seconds.
Well,
Walter,
we are all in the same boat, actually, throughout all our lives. I think that's the important point. There's no single period of life when we can say we've acted and done it, we've taken care of the problem. And almost everybody is part of the problem, too, that if we're talking about non-communicable disease, that unhealthy diets are what we see happening all throughout the life course. It's good to it's never too late. That's the one important message. You can make huge changes in your health, even at age 50 or 60. But of course, it's best to be doing it all the way through life.
And I'm going to have the last word and say, we've raised critical issues and problems and challenges here. But what I love about EAT and food is that we all love it. We all love food. It's a very positive way to come together around the issues of sustainability and climate and food security. So let's stay completely positive. And it is lunchtime now. My God, it's 2 o'clock. That's ridiculous. We've missed lunch. So let's carry on with the... Thank you to the wonderful panel.
Great.